Hello nerds, we are overdue for a video. It's been a while, been a few busy months for me. I moved, I put up a poster, which I'm really fond of. That's the game art. And I can tell you the next update is coming. And I wanted to talk a bit about it today. In particular, I wanted to talk about ability design. So what I have open here is a new skill called War Apt. Now, War Apt is going to be largely for melee, melee users, and sort of a generalist skill that any character could dip into to varying amounts, so just to supplement their melee. Because in Doors of Trithyius, you do get lots of abilities with your weapon. Here, I've a dagger equipped. I can see the dagger's tree, so I get access to all these abilities and passives. Same with blades. So we have some abilities already just because we're going daggers or whatever weapon we do, but I definitely wanted there to be a generalist melee skill so that any melee user could have more options, particularly because Chivalry, unlock Chivalry. Chivalry, this skill, which is looking a little short right now, it's going to get some new abilities. This skill, Chivalry, will become only for the knight. So no one else, none of the other characters will get that. So we needed something for everyone. And it's now nearly finished, War Apt. And I wanted to talk in this video about some of my design principles and how I went about designing all of these abilities and what I think makes good abilities in a game. Now, of course, this is just my opinion, but maybe some of these ideas will be useful for you, whatever project you're working on, or just to see, maybe you're interested to see the decision process behind the scenes for Doors of Trithyius. Okay, it's quite a long intro. Let's get into it. I have some notes here, what I wanted to say. All right. We're adding a lot of abilities to the game. What are abilities for? What are they? To me, at least in a game like a roguelike, they are structural. They are not the main content. If you've played a game like Skyrim, and I'm heavily influenced by Elder Scrolls, you probably don't remember the specific perks you picked. As cool as it did look in Skyrim, the UI, where you look up at the stars and you pick your perks, you probably don't remember what most of those perks did. They were necessary in the game for that feeling of progression and movement, but they're not the main thing. Like, the thing you remember is the experiences. You remember fighting your first dragon. You remember climbing the 1,000 steps up to the top of the mountain. I'm sorry, I can't remember what the mountain is called. You remember those special moments, and the skills are sort of there to give you something to do, something, that feeling of progression and guiding your character. But in my opinion, they don't, for an open world game, they don't matter so much. They don't matter as much as the experience. And I want to, so something for me designing War Apt and all these new abilities is, I really didn't want to add too much complexity. I think there's a, overcomplication can have a type of pretentiousness. And I've seen this in games, I think, where it's like the designer tries too hard and isn't leaving enough room for the player. One example I wanted to give is a TV show I've been watching recently is Kitchen Nightmares. And watch the British version, not the American. The American has this horrible voiceover. In Kitchen Nightmares, Gordon Ramsay he comes in to rescue a restaurant and he tries their food to start. And of course, it's Gordon Ramsay. It's overplayed for TV, but he spits it out and says, "This is terrible." And he very commonly, one of the themes is he comes in and like there's some chef and he's read all these chef books and he wants to make like the greatest recipe ever and he wants to impress everyone, and they're just way too complicated, too expensive, too hard to make. They're just throwing everything on the plate, like, because they don't trust. It's like they're not confident that what they make is going to be good. They have to like overcompensate. And I think that's a problem in a lot of games with designing abilities. It's like the abilities are overcompensating. Like, they really want the game to be fun and interesting, but it can be too much for a player. It's like, oh, I have to read all of that. I have to learn all of that. I have to like follow through. I have to like understand all these complex mechanics just to play. And it's almost like you're asking too much. People just want to play. Just let the player play. So another thing I want to throw in here is I want to show League of Legends. I played a lot of League of Legends in my university days. Too much. A lot more than school. I'll say that. Now, League of Legends, each character only has like 5 abilities, so there's room for complexity. But I'll tell you, I think there's something that happens where, like, here's Swain. Here's a character in League of Legends. Look at this. So to understand this ability, you know, you've got demonic energy. Demonic ascension is maintained with demonic energy, which decays by 5 seconds. By 5 every X seconds, increased to this by this many seconds. This is a lot. Now, far be it from me to say League of Legends is a terrible game. I had a lot of fun with it. It's extremely successful. But I think something can happen where too much in an ability, it's like it's too much cognitive burden. You're asking too much of a player. And now they've got to like learn about all these stacks and all these different timers. And at a certain point, they just check out and they just go whatever. And they simplify it internally. They go, okay, this ability, it just makes me super strong for a bit. And they kind of ignore all this extra design stuff. Again, there's a place for design. There's a place for complexity, but it has a cost. And so that's my first point, and something that was very true for me trying to design this skill and all these new abilities is the complexity is dangerous. Everything has a cost. Anything that if the player is focusing on one thing, they're not focusing on another thing. So if they're putting all their mental ability trying to like juggle one ability, they're not thinking about the other abilities. And the other thing is, the note I have here is player investment is earned. So the last thing I want is a player gets into the game, they start playing, they take this War App skill, and there's some very complicated ability here, and they're going, oh, I don't even know if this game's fun yet. I don't want to learn that. Like, I don't have to pay attention to that. Just let me hit something. Just let me fight this rat. I just want to fight. I just want to hit something. Let me hit something. So my thinking of this skill is, let's not overcomplicate it. Let's not make it too complex. Let's like make sure the player is able to hit something right away. And let's give them options to extend their freedom and not overwhelm, not over-design, not impose myself on the player. So I'm jumping around a bit here, but I'm trying to get these thoughts out. So sticking with my first point, complexity is dangerous. I want to build trust. So we try to make decisions interesting and meaningful and simple at first, and then the player as they start to get fun into the game, they're more willing to invest. They're more willing to learn. So a complex ability, I think, should come later. It's like once we've done a few deals. It's like me and the player. It's like, all right, here's one ability. And they go, okay, this is a bit fun. And I go, here's another ability. Okay, this is a bit fun. It wasn't too hard to learn. And then I go, okay, now that you're seeing some payoff, here's something a little more overcomplicated, rather than a pretentious just throwing everything. Okay, that was my first point. Complexity is dangerous. And so if you look at these War App abilities, you'll find a lot of them I tried to keep to like one short sentence. So here, our first one, Accelerated Warfare. All melee and ranged abilities require 5% less time to perform. Now, that's not super exciting. That's not some wow moment, but it doesn't have to be. Like, let's save the wow factor for a boss fight or a new creature. Let's not try to shove it into all these abilities. And there's a lot of points that are going to be available to spend, a lot of upgrades in a long playthrough. So we can't have every single ability be this crazy thing. So player reads this and they immediately understand, oh, okay, if I'm using lots of abilities, this might be something I want to go for. Maybe I want to go for it later. Or maybe if it's early game and there's one ability they really love, maybe they'll take this just to use their favorite ability over and over. But all that's to say, we're keeping it really simple here. Efficient dispatch reduces the energy costs of all melee and range abilities by 3%. Again, very simple. It's and it looks good next to these Accelerated Warfare, because now you get to think, okay, what do I value more, time or energy? And we allow the player to make a simple comparison. Versus if these abilities were complicated, it becomes increasingly hard to decide. But here I'm letting you decide. Do you want to play fast or do you want to play more abilities? So that's an example. Probably this video would be too long if I go through every one, but we'll see. Next point I want to talk about, player freedom. So leave room for the player. And I've kind of mentioned this a bit, but to expand on this point, I think there's a way in which a game is the design of a game is a conversation between the player and the designer. And if the designer over designs, if he makes the style of play too obvious, it's like the player has no room for freedom left. For example, if I'm gonna look at some MTG cards, Magic the Gathering, which I also played when I was younger a lot. If you look at a Magic card, I'm not saying this is a bad Magic card, but I want to give an example of where the design is obvious. So here we have a card, it's an enchantment. It says other enchantments you control have Shroud. That makes them more powerful. And enchanted creatures you control have Shroud. Now we look at it an enchantment like this, and it's a card like this, it's really obvious what it does. This is the make enchantment stronger card. It's like dictated on the card. And that's okay to an extent, to have some things that are just, this is obvious how you use it. But if everything's like that, if everything just says, take this card if you have enchantments in your deck, there's no room for the player to be creative. There's no room. It's like you've designed exactly like right. You filled the whole space with your design intent. And I see good gameplay often is the designer backing away. It's like, get out of the way. Let them play. Versus we compare to another Magic card here. This is Harvester of Souls. And now there's limitations here. You've got to have 6 energy to play this creature. He does specific things. He has Death Touch, which is an effect. And he has another triggered ability here. Whenever another non-token creature dies, you may draw a card. So he's doing specific things, but there's nothing on this card that says how to use it. Maybe you just need a big meat stick of a creature. Maybe you want something with this Death Touch ability. Maybe you want to use this triggered effect. Maybe you don't want to use it. So this is an example of leaving more space for the player to decide the meaning and the use. And a good design, I think, what has a mix of these types of effects, and definitely not too much of this kind. And that is something I've tried to do, is, while designing these abilities, is leave room for player freedom. I'm not dictating you how to play. If you just want to be a stat stick and just play casually and smash every monster, I want to let you do that. I don't want to force you to do some stupid thing you don't want to do, or juggle something, or think about something if you don't want to. I want you to figure it out. In fact, what I want is I want the player to feel smarter than designer. If the player's doing well, I want them to think they outsmarted me. I want them to think they found some genius strategy that I never even considered. And that's awesome. Like, you beat the system. You're doing great. So this is just restating here what I said before. The more you impose, the less the player can impose. Don't force them to waste time. So what do I mean by wasting time? Well, wasting time in terms of like something that they're forced to do, to go out of the way to do, that doesn't fit with the play style they're trying. So if we are encouraging you to play really fast and then we make an ability that forces you to slow down all the time, it's going to be extremely frustrating. We don't want to force you to waste time. We want to let you, if you're having a tough fight and you want to slow down and really think about this fight, you see some monster, you're like, okay, this monster, this snake's going to be a hard fight. I'm going to slow down. Then we'll let you slow down. But what would suck is if every fight you have to slow down. There's some ability you have to use, trigger this, and then do this, and then do some other action. And you just got to do it over and over and over and over. Well, now we're dictating to the player. And that leads me to awareness of play styles. So I think there's play styles that really do enjoy playing more casually, grinding. Let them grind. They just want to grind on low-level monsters, let them do it. And openness versus closedness, again, that's actually what I was getting at with these Magic cards. It's a closed design is one that's very obvious what it does. It's dictated what it does. An open design is something that can lets the player decide how it's effective. One example would be in Dreadheart. We have a passive. These two here. So let's go with this one. Momentum Shift. Whenever you knock back an opponent, gain 10 energy and reduce all ability cooldowns by 1. So this ability is very closed. It's just, if you have knockback, if you're going heavy knockback, this is good. It's very closed. It's not a lot of options. It's just like, do you want to go heavy into knockback? That's closed. Something more open For example, War Apt would be a good example. Predictive veering. So here we have a defensive ability, which is whenever a ranged enemy targets you with a ranged attack, that enemy suffers 2% accuracy penalty for each tile of distance between you and them, including the tile the target occupies. So this is just generally good stats, but it also has a sort of openness. It has some connections the player can make. For example, this might be more effective on someone who uses a bow than a sword. And why is that? That's because someone with a bow is keeping their distance continually, so they have more turns of being far away from an enemy target. So like as they're shooting, if you're fighting another ranged unit and you're shooting arrows back and forth, that's a lot of turns you have distance. Where a melee user, they close the gap, they're not getting this predictive veering buff very long. So that would be an example of a more open design where it has like a secondary thing you can figure out that it might be useful for you. Or if you are going heavy dodge, well, accuracy and dodge go hand in hand. So if you lower their accuracy, your dodge stat becomes more effective. But it's not obviously that. It might just be some nice stats if you feel like ranged units are beating you to death too much. So that would be an example of something openness. Lastly, I want to talk about clarity. And for me, clarity is cohesion, like ability cohesion. Like, does the name, the icon, and the effect fit? And these are all placeholder art. Someday, before release, I plan to get an artist to redo all the icons. But I think that really matters. So can we come up with a simple name that has an effect that sounds like what the name should do, that matches the icon? And then it all kind of comes to you in one clear idea of how it works. Here's an example I think it's okay, which is guarded wait. So we already have the word wait in the name, which links to the action the player could do when they pass a turn. It's called waiting. Guarded, meaning defensive. We've got an image of a guy, and he's like kind of in this foundation, this like solid castle structure. And then the ability, which is when you use wait a turn, gain 15% physical resist until your next turn. I think that's a good ability. I think it's pretty good. Players who have a reason to pass their turn a lot might take this. It's not obvious like what exactly character this will find use for. We're not telling you how much to use it. We're not saying like this type of build always wants it. Like a mage might go into War Apt to get this ability. We're giving the player freedom. We're not making it over complex, and it's just an option. It's just a utility if you want it. I love this ability, and it has that clarity. So that's what I wanted to say about clarity. I also want to make a point about tropes. Now, what happens, I think, with games is the first games, if we think of like Dungeons and Dragons, they were made to simulate, the rules of the game were made to simulate reality or what a fantasy reality might be like. But as they become more and more common, players get used to them. And so we've got our idea of reality. We've got rules to simulate it. What we start getting is new rules that are referencing the old rules. And we've kind of got this like mimetic structure where the meme becomes the object. We've got like our ideas of how these games play are what we're playing off of. And so that could get us like into, I think, dangerous places where games can get really, they lose touch with reality, what they're trying to do. We're trying to simulate, give you an experience of being an adventurer. On the other hand, tropes can provide clarity. Like if you use a keyword like bleed, everyone knows what bleed means. It means damage over time. And so you can use those tropes to give clarity to your abilities and your design without overusing them and losing touch with like, what is the actual point? Like what are we trying to do with a game? So that's like the last piece I'll say about balance and design of these abilities. I guess we could go through some of these. It's a lot. Like I don't want to just read all these, but I was excited to share the design. That's going to be in the next update soon. Probably some more balancing and tweaks to do. These art of preparation abilities I'm really excited for. Prepare for war. If you do not attack for 5 consecutive turns, your next attack gains +5 damage, plus an additional 0.2 damage for every level of War Apt. All right. Do not attack for 5 turns. So I'm leaving it up to the player in a way to decide, is that good or bad? It's a for 2 points. It's a bit of an expensive ability. It's more like this ability is forcing you is connecting back to the game world. It's not just stats. So you do have to consider how many turns. So like if you really want to, if you want to get this buff up and you're in a fight, you're gonna have to run away for 5 turns and not hit. And so in that way, it is reconnecting you to the game world, but in a way that is not too complex and too much burden to consider, and can drastically affect the fight. Like if you really want to leverage this, you might hit, run, hit, run, hit, run. This could create a whole hit, run playstyle. Or it could be used just as an initial fight starter when you kick down the door, get a big first hit in. Both of those work. So I think this is a fun ability. I think these kind of things will work really well. And that's War App. Basically a lot of utility for offense, defense, some shield, and two-handed abilities. And then any player can spec into it and create more versatile builds, with the more advanced stuff being the character-specific builds like Dreadheart or Chivalry and the Coming Magic. So I think that's what I wanted to say about abilities. Thanks for watching. I don't think I have a lot more, just that the update's coming. It's gonna hopefully have a lot of stuff. I had a slow month working, just like I mentioned at the start, moving, and I also do software consulting on the side, and that became a huge thing and was a little burnt out. But here we are, back on track, and excited to get this new update into your guys' hands. So thanks for watching, and that's it for me for today.